What is up? The NFL season is inching closer to an end. It is week 16, and I'm going to guess some of our fantasy seasons are already over. But week 17 doesn't mean the end of fantasy football. In DFS, you can play all the way through the Super Bowl. And if your team in redraft is already letting you down, you might as well start building some lineups with us. Let's get into it. What is up? Happy Friday. Welcome to the weekend. It's week 16 in the NFL, and this is the DFS Academy Club Fantasy's weekly DFS show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are the fantasy playoffs shaping up for you?
Not great, actually. I'm still alive in one league. I was, wait for it, 0.38 points away from advancing to the semifinal in an underdog tournament. So,
Okay.
Hey, but we have some teams that are still going that are just the season-long best ball teams, and those are doing very well, very profitable on that end.
Hey, I love to hear it. When you mentioned what you were down the 0.38, I ended Monday night, and you're in this league, so you're aware of this already. I ended Monday night thinking that I lost a quarterfinal matchup to our good friend Zach by 0.16. And I said, man, Zach, you better hope there isn't a 2-yard stat correction. Austin, I don't know what they changed. There was a 3-point stat correction, and neither Zach nor myself realized it till today when we went to go set lineups for the Thursday. I thought I was setting for the consolation bracket. I saw who I was playing, and I said, wait, they won last week. And I went and saw that instead of losing by 0.16, I won by 3 points. Sucks to suck, Zach. So I'm alive, I think, in 7 playoffs right now, and it's pretty much an even split, like 4 redraft and 3 dynasty. It's just been a weird season, but my best ball, I didn't play a lot of best ball this summer, and I didn't do well in what I did play. I think the only tournaments I took down were the ones when Fantasy Alarm invited Club Fantasy on to co-host with them. I think I took down like all 3 of those that I was in with those folks. So
Yeah, well, that's partially because you took A.T. Perry in all of those drafts.
Here's the thing. That's not untrue, but it's not like there was somebody in the 18th I was going to do better with. I mean, apparently it should have been Michael Penix as he steals the show heading into week 16. Spoiler alert. We'll talk about him later. Guys, if you've never watched DFS Academy before, we are going to break down the week 16 main slate. I realized, Austin, after our show last week, that I was talking a lot about the Saturday games coming into play. That's this week. It was not last week. So clearly, once we get to the end of the season, my brain just becomes scrambled and I don't know what I'm talking about. But the main slate starts to get a little weird now, especially moving into next week where we're going to have Christmas Day games and everything's about to get weird. But all 32 teams are active. We talk about the Sunday main slate, the 1 o'clock games, the 4 o'clock games, and if you're on FanDuel, the 8 o'clock game. We break it down into a cash segment and a tournament segment. So we start off the show talking about cash. That is Austin's specialty. He's going to break down to you his favorite cash plays of the week. Keep in mind, we record this show on Thursday night. So there's going to be a lot of information between now and Sunday. I always urge folks to come back, read Austin's article that drops on Saturdays. It's kind of an update to this show, and it gives you a lot of great information about his favorite cash plays for the week. Before we do any of that, subscribe, do all the things you're supposed to do to make us a very successful YouTube page. We couldn't be here without our viewers, so we appreciate you doing that little bit of extra work, a couple of extra clicks of the finger to boost us up in the algorithm. Also, if you want to play DFS with us, we don't just talk about it. We host some small tournaments on FanDuel and DraftKings. You will find links in the description of this video and in Austin's article that drops every Saturday, so you can jump in, play that tournament with us. We announce the winners at the end of the show every week. We have a couple of winners that I'll talk about at the end of this show that took down the week 15 contest. But before we get started into cash, we like to recap what we call answers to the test. And we like to talk about last week's Milli making lineup and see if there's anything we can learn from it. Also, I'm going to announce this lineup, but I want to get started by saying, I said last week I thought we maybe found a formula to the Milli maker. Find the game with the highest over-under, maybe double stack. throw a bring back in there, and then this lineup comes in and just doesn't do any of that. So I don't know what we're talking about at this point. Last week's Milli making lineup was Jared Goff, Chase Brown, Ramondre Stevenson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, Brian Thomas Jr., Brenton Strange, Sam Laporta, and the Denver defense. So, Austin, when I looked at this lineup, a couple of things jumped out at me. So they went with a Detroit double stack, but brought no bring back. That's not a terrible strategy, especially when you look at the Buffalo Bills. You obviously can't bring back Josh Allen. This isn't super flex. You never quite know who's going to score for the Buffalo Bills. But then, Austin, 2 Jacksonville Jaguars pass catchers with Mac Jones at quarterback. And to top it all off, if you didn't notice, I mentioned 2 tight ends. This may have been Kelly in Phoenix who won this Milli Maker for all I know, Austin. I know she's looking for a new job, so I hope she did win the $1 million, and all my best to her. But Austin, after last week's, what I thought very formulaic $1 million lineup, this isn't it.
Yeah, I mean, there were some weird things going on in this, but okay, let's point out a couple of things. First off, the person that won the Milli Maker, which has happened many times this year, entered 150 lineups.
Good Lord. It's like these millionaires win this thing and then just max enter every week, $3,000 or whatever it is.
And I mean, with that, they had Jared Goff in only 2% of their lineups, which is interesting. Like they were able to do a lot of different things. But I think because of that, if 2%, geez, I should know what 2% of 150 is, but I can't do that math off the top of my head. So I'm going to stall. That's like, wow, 3 lineups. Is that real?
3.
That is wild. So 3 of their lineups. They only had
3 Jared Goff lineups out of 150 on the highest over-under of the entire slate.
Yeah. So what that says to me is there was probably a lot of Josh Allen in their 150 lineups.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things I think we may have referenced in passing. And if we didn't, we should have the idea that, like, if you're playing this game, like you could do a 3-entry contest and have 3 different versions of Jared Goff at the quarterback position. We talked about, so let's say go with Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think we said Tim Patrick is the name that we threw out there. We're talking about it. But when you have a game like this where there's a lot of potential players that could get the ball, there's a lot of potential scoring that could be had, it pays to be able to multi-enter in some of these contests and get different mixtures of those guys. So I on the Lions side, I still feel good about the process. I think the biggest thing is just like the fact that the New York Jets Jacksonville game was in play here. I think more than anything is what kind of threw this off. Looking back on that matchup, that game ended up having a 41.5 point over under. Like that's not the high scoring bonanza. Like compare that to Buffalo Detroit. That was a 55.5 point over under, right? Like
2 fewer touchdown on the over under.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things where it's just a reminder to not overlook the games that are projected to be lower scoring, that they can still have pretty stellar fantasy production, and games do hit the over from time to time. It actually does happen pretty commonly. So it's a little bit like, don't get too fixated on just one story, but it's also a reminder that when you're playing in these giant contests, people are going to be able to do weird stuff. They're going to be max entering these 150 entry contests. And if you can't enter 150 entries into one of those contests, sorry, Ryan, you probably shouldn't enter that contest.
I told you I blew my bankroll. I'm actually not in anymore. So I agree. I'll set my new bankroll next year, and I'll give myself money. I'll be way more disciplined. I was very undisciplined this year, and I'll have to step that back up next year. But regardless, it is a lottery ticket. But the more I talk with your very rational mind, Austin, the more I realize that, like, I'm never going to win this lottery. But regardless, I do like to give credit where credit's due. Jared Goff was your main tournament quarterback last week, and he was the Milli Maker winner. And Denver was my favorite defense. So we got the quarterback and the defense right. More on that a little bit later as well, Austin, because that defense came into play very, very heavily when it came to our head-to-head. But let's get into those cash plays. Again, we're recording this on Thursday night, so there's going to be some things that change between now and Sunday. Make sure you are following Austin. Make sure you are looking out for his article that drops on clubfantasyffl.com every Saturday morning. Austin, it's top of the class time. These are the expensive players. 8 1,000 or more. And I'll be honest, you have been so fixated on running backs as of late. I don't know that we've heard this name in a little while, and I think it's certainly time to hear it more often.
Yeah, I definitely have been heavy on running backs this year, but there are some interesting wide receivers that I'm looking at this week. Starting with Jamar Chase, who is 8,500 on DraftKings, 95 on FanDuel. He is the most expensive receiver, at least on DraftKings. This isn't like a lot of times when we talk about some of these players, we'll talk about the matchup, which the matchup is fine. But honestly, it comes down to the usage here for Jamar Chase. He has been getting a ridiculous amount of volume in this offense. They clearly are trying to run the offense through him more consistently than what they had been earlier in the year and what they had been at times over the past couple of years. I know some folks have like thrown out there that they're trying to get him the triple crown, but looking at his target volume, he has had at least 10 targets in 6 of his last 7 games, which is just berserk. Like the fact that anybody can get that volume is wild. So it's really an easy click on that. And I think, the other thing about this is pending how tonight's game ends, as we're recording, the Thursday night game ends, Cincinnati technically, mathematically, is still in the playoffs. And I think even if Denver wins tonight, which when I joined this stream, they were up. Denver locks their chance into the playoffs, but the Chargers are then become vulnerable. And if the Bengals win out, and the Chargers charger it up and lose out, there's a world where the Bengals still make the playoffs. And so they're gonna want to play tough in this game and to win it. And Jameis is going to be throwing the ball, or actually DTR's on the other side.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So this is going to be interesting on what happens game script wise on their end, but I think they're going to still pass the ball on the Cincinnati Bengals side, and that'll benefit Jamar Chase.
Any worry to the Joe Burrow struggles against the Browns narrative? He's 2-5 against the Browns. Now he's put up some decent numbers against them in a game or two. I went back and looked. Jamar Chase scored a touchdown when they faced each other earlier in the season. So I think Jamar Chase is probably safe regardless. But I've been touting all week that I think Joe Burrow puts that narrative behind his back this week. So
yeah, I tend to not buy into like one-off narratives like that in general. And so I'm not going to worry about it here either. And to your point, like even if Joe Burrow doesn't have a great game, like Jamar Chase can still get there. And even if they aren't able to like pull out the victory, which I think they should be able to do, like should be good.
Certainly hope so.
Let's also keep in mind, like one of those games was week 1 last year when he was injured. So there's one data point.
And the Bengals may be the worst week 1 team in NFL history, the Joe Burrow Bengals. So.
Or the worst month 1 team of the
NFL. That's true too.
And so there is some additional context there. I think there could be potentially some home road splits here, but overall, I'm not going to worry about it when it comes to Jamar Chase and Cash.
No, I think that's fair. Pretty incredible that the Bengals have somewhat been viewed as a lost season, and they are not out of the playoff race. So I'll be very interested to see how that shakes out over these next 2 weeks. As we move on from the high price players, we move to the mids. We call them the band nerds. These are the good students, just a little bit too much time with their instruments to move up to the top of the class. We're talking $6,000 to $8,000 budget players, Austin. And I'm going to be honest, when I scrolled your sheet just so I can get an idea of how I was going to lead into these players, I don't think I've ever seen this many marquee players on an Austin lineup before.
Yeah, so I kind of broke the rules.
You definitely broke the rules, my friend. You said no mids. We're going all highs this time.
So these are kind of the band nerds, but I was like, I don't really want to eliminate the band nerd section for tonight, so we're gonna just put these guys in here. First off, we have Bijan Robinson, who is $8,100 on DraftKings, $8,900 on FanDuel. A wild price. The Giants are bad against the run, against running backs, and Atlanta has a really great running back, and they're favored by 8.5 points despite changing quarterback this week and putting in a rookie quarterback that has never started in the NFL. Incredible. And they have a applied team total of 25 points. Also incredible for the spot for Bijan Robinson. So I'm rocking with him. He's been consistently getting touches. He gets a lot of dump offs now. That may change a little bit with Michael Penix under center. I don't really think it will. Like he's a really talented running back, receiving back too. Like he gets schemed receptions as well. So it's not just like, breaking case of emergency dump off. So I'm not worried about Bijan on that front. I think he's a totally fine play this week.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And you get the thought that rookie quarterbacks tend to enjoy dumping the ball off. So even if he is break glass in case of emergency dump off, there could be quite a few of those, at least in the first half of this game. For a while, the Giants had one of the better pass rushes in the NFL this season. It's fallen off as the Giants have. But I agree completely. This is a game that the Atlanta Falcons need to win this game. This might be the most important game of their entire season all of a sudden, because they are a playoff contending team that is choosing to go to an unproven quarterback. This is the most important game of Atlanta season by far. And why wouldn't you give the ball to easily your best and safest player?
Yeah, I mean, if they lose this week, it's basically over for their playoff chances. So they definitely need to win. The other player I'm going for, also not technically in this price range, is Justin Jefferson, who is $8,200 on DraftKings and $9K on FanDuel. Now, I don't need to really tell you why Justin Jefferson is a good play. I probably do need to explain to you how I'm making this happen, though, and how I'm legitimizing.
Austin's getting weird. Austin waited 16 weeks to get real weird on me. So
all three of these players in my lineup, it is because of the aforementioned Michael Penix. I am contemplating playing Michael Penix in cash this week. Now, you check out my article on Saturday to find out if I have stuck with that or not through the rest of the week. But right now, I'm very inclined to say he's like $4,600 on DraftKings. That's a very low price point. If he gets 12 points, we're feeling good about that. Michael Penix is a little bit mobile too, so he can score a rushing touchdown as well. He's got a little bit of a safe floor there. He doesn't have to do much. And I think this offense structurally is pretty good. Kirk Cousins just hasn't been mobile for most of the season. And so that's limited their performance. So if Michael Penix is able to have just a like normal game, 200 passing yards and a touchdown, like that gets you 12 points. That's all he needs to do. And so I'm thinking about playing him as my cash quarterback, and then that enables me to jam in all three of the guys we've talked about so far: Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, when I was setting up my DFS rankings today, Austin, I noticed I had to scroll for way longer than I thought I would on FanDuel. Penix is at the quarterback minimum 6,000 over on FanDuel. So like literally you cannot have a cheaper quarterback than Michael Penix. And if you guys have never played cash before, that's going to make him crazy chalk, but we don't care. It's the free square. If everybody's playing him, it doesn't matter how he does. Right, Austin?
Yeah, exactly. Because if he ends up being, I mean, I don't know that he will get beyond 30% rostership. I don't know if it's that much of a free square this week, but if he were to get to the 50% plus range, then it's like, okay, well, everybody's doing it. So if he fails, we all fail together. And it's about your other picks and your other plays.
How did you use that money? So
exactly. And it's an interesting thing in those 50-50 contests, because if you're playing in just head-to-heads and the other person is also playing Michael Penix, well, then, you literally don't care what happens then. It's literally going to zero out, and it's all about where you were able to build your lineup elsewhere.
Yeah, I almost feel like Penix is that weird, like he makes a ton of sense in cash. I just wonder if he's a bridge too far in tournament play. Like, does he have slate breaking? But who's to say he doesn't? We know nothing about this kid except what we saw in college, which was great, and that the Falcons overdrafted him. Well, if the Falcons were right, and they've just been keeping him in their back pocket this entire time, against the Giants, this kid could break the slate in week 16. I think pretty easily, Austin. Like, I think if you play DFS and don't have a Michael Penix lineup, I feel like you're doing it wrong. Like, I know we don't shame here, but I feel like use the kid this week. Like, it just makes sense until we figure out what he is.
Yeah, I do think it's worth it in tournaments. I definitely will not be like overexposed in tournament settings to him.
Just
to your
build
point.
three of your 150 lineups with Michael Penix. It might win you $1 million. So.
Yeah, if you're doing those 150 max, definitely have at least one with Michael Penix.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Moving on, Austin. Obviously, if you're going a lot of stars up top, we're going to need to get some players from the bottom as well. We call them the bookworms. We're talking $4,000 to $6,000 players. Easily underestimated. And Austin, you start this whole thing off with a bring back.
Yeah, which I didn't realize I was doing that actually at first. It's a
Oh,
little bit of an accident.
So I was going to ask you, Austin, in the last question, because I sometimes get my order of operations incorrect. I was going to say, in cash, it's not a faux pas to start a running back and a quarterback together, but would you go with a bring back? But then I glanced down and saw that you had a bring back. Hilariously, you didn't realize you had a bring back. But I also want to give Austin credit as we talk about Wan'Dale Robinson, folks. Austin has been on the Wan'Dale Robinson train for so long and been getting crap from me about it for so long. Austin, I think he's an interesting play this week, though.
Yeah, I think so too. So he's $4,100 on DraftKings. He's $5,100 on FanDuel. Before we get into Wan'Dale Robinson himself, the Falcons can't defend shit.
Nope.
Particularly not the pass game.
Nope.
And that's going to come up later in our tournament segment, but it's going to be handy here because Wan'Dale Robinson, all of a sudden, now that Drew Lock is under center, he was still playing, right? Geez, like these quarterbacks are changing so much at this point of the season.
So last night on our Wednesday show, the injury update, the injury tags dropped about an hour before the show, 2 hours before the show, and I had already done my rankings update. So every player we started talking about has a questionable tag now. And I went to the wide receiver. Austin, you rank on Fantasy Pros. I clicked the little thing in the top right where it shows players with issues. It's literally like 50 players with the questionable tag right now. What a week right now for week 16. But to answer your question, Drew Lock is the confirmed starter for this week.
Good. Because since he's been the starter, Wan'Dale Robinson is getting targets again.
Yeah.
Issue is he's not quite getting catches, but he has an 11 target game and a 9 target game in his past 2 games. In both games, funny enough, ended with 4 receptions for 38 yards. So I'm like, if he's getting the volume, he's getting the target share against a bad Atlanta secondary, like, yeah, go for it. And also particularly for Wan'Dale Robinson, he's not going to draw attention from AJ Terrell. He's going to draw attention from whoever the heck is in the slot for the Falcons. And I can tell you it's not good.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed that because we've been getting a lot of Malik Neighbors questions this week. And I'm like, you fire Neighbors up against the Falcons. I don't care who the quarterback was. I was hoping Tim Boyle was going to be the one who unlocked Malik Neighbors since we saw the touchdown for him in relief last week. But they benched Tim Boyle, go back to Locke. Hopefully Locke learned a thing or two and they can get Malik Neighbors. But I agree. Wan'Dale Robinson is a PPR guy. He may not find the end zone, but at $4,100, you don't need him to find the end zone.
Yeah, exactly. So my other guy in this category is Patrick Taylor, which you may not know who that is. He is a running back for the San Francisco 49ers. I believe he is probably technically their 4th string running back because Christian McCaffrey is out. Isaac Guerrero is out. Their Jordan Mason's out. Actually, was Elijah Mitchell still on the roster?
I was just going to say, yeah, he was. He is technically their 5th running back this season. So
yeah. So wow, what a time for Patrick Taylor, but he should be the starter. And I don't know that he's going to get like 20 touches, but he might get 15, and he might not do great. But I wonder if he's going to be someone that people just all roster because they're like, oh, a starting running back for $5,200. It's that free square concept we just talked about with Michael Penix. And I think if he's getting 15, 20 touches, it's also like, okay, well, I can pay up elsewhere. I can get Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson in my lineup. And this is one of the pathways to do it. So I think it's totally a fair consideration. Obviously, the way I'm building my lineup, if it relies on these cheap guys. So if you decide like it's too risky to play Patrick Taylor, like you're going to have to definitely like change your approach. And I think there are some interesting ways to get there on the slate. But I think this like stars and scrubs approach where you have some really cheap guys that are going to have the opportunity, like that's totally fine. I feel like almost any running back for San Francisco, regardless of their skill set, has the potential to be a solid fantasy running back, maybe not like break the ceiling and be the slate breaker, but Patrick Taylor should be just fine this week at a price tag of $5,200.
Yeah. I noticed this week, Austin, and this lends itself to your stars and scrubs approach. I noticed when I was putting together my DFS rankings that I liked the expensive players far more than the cheap players this week. And I feel like it's the sites are doing a better job with pricing. So when I do the rankings, I take price into consideration, but I try to rank the players that I just flat out like. And occasionally there are guys who were super cheap that I feel need to be ranked. Like I think they're part of the top plays that week. This week I struggled with that. Like there were times where I moved a guy up and I'm like, no, I just think the more expensive player is the better play this week. So it goes to like, there's so many good plays at the top, but you can't just take all the top players. You got to find the bottom. And I think taking these certainly in cash, taking these starters who are coming in at league minimums, and certainly with Patrick Taylor, it stands out to me. This might be our first player this season, but we've noticed it in the past, who is actually cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's good. And I mean, when I was looking through the players on this slate, like there's a ton of players in that middle tier that I'm not that excited about this week, that their volume isn't very clear. And you're right. I think we're at the point in the season where the utilization of players is pretty freaking clear, and DraftKings and FanDuel have responded accordingly. I mean, I got to remember that running back off the top of my head. There's a running back that all of a sudden, or maybe it was a receiver. There's a player that I saw was priced at like 7,800 on this slate that I would have never guessed would have been up there. Yes. Chase Brown is $7,700 this week.
Yeah.
He is the third most expensive running back on the slate. Chase Brown, respect the guy. He is not the third best running back in the league, but he's getting the amount of volume that
his fantasy consistency is through the roof right now. So
yeah, and he's being priced ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, like these guys that have been staples. So it's just one of those things where it's like at this point in the season, like there is an element where it's like you got to pay up and find some cheapies elsewhere.
Pricing anybody ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, we didn't know the David Montgomery news when they did the pricing, but pricing anybody ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs feels like a mistake right now. In Austin, we obviously had to scrape the bottom of the barrel a little bit to make this lineup work. C's get degrees, the punt plays of the week. We're talking sub $4,000 players. Typically that means on DraftKings, not necessarily on FanDuel. Austin, you got your tight end from the bottom here. So.
Yeah, and this one we've talked about before. We're going back to Grant Calcaterra, who is $3,400 on DraftKings, $4,800 on FanDuel. Dallas Goedert still on IR. Grant Calcaterra has continued to play a pretty consistent role in this offense over the past several weeks, given the fact that he is the backup tight end. Now, he only had one target last week, but that was kind of a runaway game, and Philadelphia was able to run all over Pittsburgh. So, take that with a grain of salt. But the week before, he was 3 for 3 for a touchdown, and I think that he's been heavily utilized throughout the year, getting at least 3-4 targets. And with a guy that's priced at this level, like you're hoping he falls into the end zone. Also, the matchup for Philadelphia is pretty good against the Washington Commanders, who have allowed the 9th most points to the tight end position since week 12. So it's a good spot for Calcaterra.
Yeah, I'm hoping that game turns out better for fantasy managers than the last one did. I was giving Josh, our resident Philadelphia Eagles fan, a hard time. And the last time these two teams faced off, Jaden Daniels didn't even throw a touchdown. I think he ran one. Or no, other way around. Jalen Hurts did not throw one. He ran one in, and Jaden Daniels only threw one and threw a pick with it as well. So hopefully we get better Washington Philly this time around. And it should benefit Grant Calcaterra as well, as you mentioned, as the starting tight end there in Philadelphia.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the cash portion. And I urge you one last time, make sure you check out Austin's article on Saturday. Picking players on Thursday nights is hard, but it's also the best time for us to record. All the information we're giving you is great as of Thursday night, but we have no idea how the injuries are going to break down. Usually it's not so much Austin starts to hate the players he talked about here. He just starts to like other players better because we find out that everybody's questionable. With that, we move on to tourney talk. And this is where Austin and I give you some of our favorite picks at each position. I give you one player or two at each position. Austin gives you enough that you can start a full Austin lineup. Austin is better at this than me. I highly recommend that. Austin, let's get started with the quarterbacks. And you are going to start off with somebody who I have sworn off in fantasy this year because I can never guess when this kid is actually going to have a good game.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of tournaments. And I think this is the week where he has a good game. So Caleb Williams is playing against the Detroit Lions this week, who have been a tough defense in general this year, but they are so freaking injured. They
A
get
walking wounded.
they get more hurt every week. It is really, and like everybody gets more hurt every week. It's gotten especially bad for them. They're like losing players every week, not just like banged up at more and more every week. The Lions have allowed the most points to the quarterback position since week 12. Not great. This is one of the highest over-unders. Sorry, it is the highest over-under on the slate, tied with the Dallas-Tampa Bay game. Detroit are favored clearly in this matchup, and by 6.5 points. So Chicago will be playing from behind, which lends itself to the pass game. And I want to harken back a little bit to the Thursday Thanksgiving Day slate, because during that game, or going into those games, it was like, well, Caleb Williams was kind of the chalk play, actually, because of his pricing.
Yeah.
And I decided, I'm not going to play him because I don't think he has the upside. Well, then he ended up being in the optimal for the Thanksgiving Day slate.
Let's be clear, though. For 30 minutes, you looked like a genius because my man went into halftime with like 30 yards and looked like the worst quarterback in NFL history. So
yeah, and then he comes out and he ends up with
balls out like
256 yards and 3 touchdowns, and so wins and losses. Oh, and he also added on 39 yards on the ground. So it might not look pretty, but you don't need it to look pretty. You need it to score fantasy points. And I think this is a good spot for it. And also, like, again, I don't want to beat this too much, but Detroit is so injured. Like, it's going to be an easier defense for him to go against. And the fact that he just saw them recently, like, part of the reason he looked better in the second half is he made second half adjustments. Now, there's been a lot of adjustments in Chicago overall since then, but I like the idea of buying into Caleb Williams here and saying that he continues to gain experience and be more confident against the Detroit Lions.
So Austin, when I was trying to choose my favorite tournament quarterback, what's funny is Matthew Stafford doesn't even make my top 8 in my rankings over at Football Guys for FanDuel, I think it was, because Baker Mayfield invades that slate because of the Sunday night game. And so I couldn't even find a way to get Stafford into my rankings. But the more I thought about it, someone asked us a DFS question on our Wednesday show last night. And we said, our DFS show drops on Fridays. So hopefully you're watching. Welcome. Our DFS show drops on Fridays. But right now, I think my favorite stack was, and I said my favorite stack is probably Stafford and one of his wide receivers. And I'm high on Cooper Kupp. That's what I'll talk about a little bit in my wide receiver section, because he gave people zeros last week and people are like swearing him off now. And I think that's a enormous overreaction. But we saw the Jaguars play well against this Jets defense rather. And I think we're going to see something similar out of Matt Stafford this week. These guys still have a lot to prove technically. Again, not out of the playoff hunt. They're fighting with everybody right now. That division is wide open because of how bad San Francisco's been playing. So I think they in Arizona might be in the lead right now. So there's a lot going on there. The Rams have a lot more to play for than the Jets. And the fact of the matter is the Jets defense kind of gets overblown. They can pick a ball off here and there, but they're not getting after the quarterback as much. I think Stafford with these 2 wide receivers, the Jets have given up the second most points to fantasy quarterbacks over the last 5 games, if I remember correctly. And in that same span, they've given up the 6th most to wide receivers. And when you're dealing with a quarterback who has weapons like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, Austin, I think Stafford gives you that safe floor, but I think there's that 3 touchdown, not quite slate breaking, not Jared Goff 5 touchdowns, but I think we could see some goodness out of Matt Stafford this week.
I think so too. And I think that a little bit of a correction on one thing you're saying, it's them in Seattle that's tied for the top spot. But to your point, if Los Angeles wins this game, Seattle is playing Minnesota, who, by the way, 12-2,
12-2
team. If Seattle loses that game to Minnesota, which is very possible, then Los Angeles then has sole ownership of the NFC West, which is going to be huge going down the stretch. And I think you're right. Like over the past 4 weeks, the Jets have allowed the 4th most points to the receiver position. This defense is not as good without Robert Saleh, and I think it is a good position for Matt Stafford and his receivers to get there. And honestly, I'm gonna do the pivot for you, Ryan, here, because ties into the running back conversation very well because I have Aaron Jones on the Minnesota side. So this is getting into more NFC drama because Minnesota is in a position where they should be able to beat Seattle, put themselves in a position to continue fighting for that 1 seed and putting Seattle in a tough spot over there in the NFC West. So for Aaron Jones, it's a good spot. Seattle's allowed the 7th most points to the running back position since week 12. And overall, I think that he might just get overlooked in this game a little bit. I think he's been highly utilized. We haven't seen kind of a ceiling game from him recently, but also given the fact that like I'm looking at Justin Jefferson and Cash, and he's likely to be a highly rostered receiver. He's probably going to be a cash receiver for a lot of people. It might mean that he gets highly rostered in tournaments as well, and that Aaron Jones gets overlooked, which I think will be a little bit of a mistake because I think he can definitely get there. And I'm also looking to attack this game in general. So later on, I'm going to have some players on the Seattle side.
Yeah.
I think playing into the run game on the Minnesota side is an interesting way to get at this, and I think potentially an optimal way to get at this matchup.
Yeah. And then moving on, you're going with another sort of contrarian because people are going to want other parts of that Buffalo offense.
Yeah. So Buffalo is favored by 14 points, which to me screams running game.
Yeah.
And also James Cook, like he always does this thing where he like sneakily ends up being a really good fantasy player, and I just forget that it happens and that he exists. He ended up with over 20 DraftKings points last week. 2 weeks ago kind of had a down performance, but 3 games ago there was another game with 20 or more points. Like he's had these multi-touchdown games, and coming into the year, the whole meme was like, oh, Josh Allen's never going to let James Cook score a red zone touchdown. Well, now he is. James Cook is getting into the end zone pretty regularly. And if they're going to be playing ahead, I like the opportunity for James Cook to get there. And also, there have been games where both Josh Allen and James Cook have gotten there from a fantasy perspective, which is kind of bonkers because of the style of player James Cook is. But he's been playing really well, and this offense has just been rolling in general. So I'm totally fine playing it on James Cook this week.
I made a joke to my little brother earlier in the season, and I wish I had done it because I bet the money is there. If you had bet first touchdown scorer on James Cook or Josh Allen in every Buffalo game this season, I almost guarantee you'd be up because first touchdown pays like plus 250 to plus 300 minimum. And it seems like it's always one of those two to your point, Austin. Like Josh Allen is not stealing from James Cook. They are coexisting. So
yeah, completely.
And then it took 16 weeks, but I learned from you is when I was looking at my running backs, I was like, who do I think is going to be a hot stack this week? And I think people are tired of Trey McBride not scoring touchdowns. I think we're going to see a lot of Kyler and Trey McBride in tournaments because people want to have that edge at tight end. And I think we're going to forget that James Conner, as of this moment, has the Arizona backfield to himself. Trey Benson is dealing with a ankle, hip. He's dealing with something. Amari DiMercado is already on the IR. James Conner could very well be the only healthy running back besides like DJ Dallas, which means a heavy workload against the worst team in football, the Carolina Panthers. So I think where people are going to see that it's Carolina, let's attack this game. But I think Conner could go under the radar, even though he was the RB1 last week. And Austin, to your point, Chase Brown's priced higher than him. Like there are so many players priced infinitely higher, even though James Conner is coming off a 2-touchdown RB1 finish last week. So I like him because I feel like he's just a little different. It's not the way people are necessarily going to choose to attack this Arizona game, but even still, I feel like he's the good kind of chalk. Like I feel like he's going to find the end zone twice. So I don't care if everybody has him. So
yeah. And honestly, I almost didn't provide a second running back because I really like James Conner as well this week, which did for a second make me think maybe he's a cash play actually, but I do like him in tournaments as well. Like even if he is a little bit chalky, I think it's totally fine. He is $100 more than James Cook, which is very important for the lineup I am building through this. I needed that $100, but I do like James Conner as well. So if you want to trade out one of the receivers that I'm about to talk through for James Conner, I think it's also a really great way to attack the slate.
And you got us there. So you're going with a 4 wide receiver build this week. So let's go ahead and talk about those 4 wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about them in a little bit of a weird order. So, first, I mentioned Aaron Jones on the Minnesota side of that Minnesota Seattle game. I'm bringing it back with Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is weirdly priced kind of lowly. He was in the 6K range, even though he has been the Seattle's like number one receiver. And Minnesota, for all of the hype about how they are a weird defense and they throw quarterbacks off and they blitz a lot and they do all sorts of funky stuff, they get gashed by receivers. They have allowed the second most points to the receiver position over the past 4 weeks, which is absolutely bonkers. Again, Seattle needs to win this game. Geno Smith has been playing good quarterback. The issue is the offensive line, so that may limit some of the upside here. But if JSN is getting like 10 targets and he ends up having one of those 9-catch, 150-yard games, like he could easily break the slate. And I like this matchup because of all of the implications there and how much these two teams are going to want it. So I want to have access to that Minnesota Seattle correlation. I'm
If
also
you haven't, well, I was just going to throw out for folks, if you haven't been paying attention to Seattle, Jackson Smith and Jigba over his last 7 games here, 70 yards, 180 yards, 110 yards, 77 yards, 74 yards, 82 yards, 83 yards. Those are consecutive games, folks, that he is just constantly putting these numbers up. He is one of the safest wide receivers in fantasy right now. But in those same 7 games or 6 games, he has 4 touchdowns. He has the ceiling too. I love that pick, Austin.
Yeah, I think it's a great spot for him. Going back to the conversation about the Chicago game, so Chicago's playing Detroit. I am stacking DJ Moore with Caleb Williams in this one. DJ Moore and Caleb Williams had some good chemistry in that Detroit game the last time they played, and Moore's continued to get targets, and we've seen Moore is pretty good with yards after the catch. He gets in the end zone, so I like it there. I also think he's a little bit safer than Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze. Like, I don't think they've really figured out exactly how they're using their 3 receivers yet. So I'm going with DJ Moore. A couple of other receivers that are kind of randos. They're not really correlated anywhere. First off, there's Malik Neighbors. This is just going back to the Atlanta conversation. Yeah. I think that Malik Neighbors has the potential for a lot of upside there. And I think the Atlanta New York game could be a little bit of a sneaky game as well this week. I don't think it's going to like play as like one of the highest scoring games. It actually, I think it's playing as one of the lower scoring games. Yeah, it's a 42 point over under, which is the 3rd lowest on the week. But I could see this game ending up hitting the over because these defenses are not good. So I like the idea of playing Malik Neighbors against the Atlanta Falcons secondary. And then my last player is another one-off, and it's Juwan Jennings, who just has continued to be a stud throughout the season. He had a down week last week, but there's no one in the running back room to really threaten this game. This should be a tight game. It's a 1-point spread between San Francisco and Miami, and Jennings has been a target hog on and off. And really, whenever he's been hot, he's been getting the ball a ton in this offense. So I could see us getting another like 7-8 catch game for Juwan Jennings, which could be huge for him. He's pretty cheap. I was able to squeeze him into this lineup by saving that $100 by playing James Cook instead of James Conner.
There you go. That makes a ton of sense. For me, I'm going to start by stacking Matthew Stafford with either Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp. Kupp is the cheaper option. I also think he's going to be the forgotten option this week, so I'm going with Kupp. And I'm also going to do a bring back in this game because I do think this is going to be an interestingly high-scoring game. Aaron Rodgers has a constant chip on his shoulder, but it seems like he has a lot to prove right now. He's been playing really well in second halves, and so I think this could be a very interesting matchup. So you can bring back with Devontae Adams or Garrett Wilson. Wilson is the cheaper option, but Adams and Rodgers seem to be back to their old shtick. So I'm going to go for my stack of Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams, but I think there's some fun you can have with that game. So to go outside of this game, I'm going to touch on a game Austin's been talking about, and that's Drake London against the Giants, because as bad as Atlanta is as bad as the Giants are. And we have seen over the last few weeks, this offense is built around Drake London. He is very much the leading target getter. He's putting up the same kind of numbers I was telling you guys, Jackson Smith and Jigba, 97 yards, 60 yards, 86 yards, 70 yards, 50 yards. The targets, he had a 16 target game 2 weeks ago. Now, last week, it was a 3 target game, which is why Kirk Cousins is no longer the starting quarterback. I don't think it's coincidence that the first highlights we saw of Michael Penix this week were forcing the ball to Drake London. I think this is going to be the game plan this week when they're not handing it off to Bijan Robinson. So I think this is a week where you want to lean on Drake London. Don't get cute. Ray McLeod, Austin, you called him perfectly 2 weeks ago. I don't think this is a week where we're going to see the third wide receiver heavily involved. I'll be happy to be wrong. I just don't see it going down that way. I think they're going to shorten the route tree, thin out the playbook, and give this kid, Michael Penix, something he can handle. And that's throw the ball to your 6'4" or 5 wide receiver. Let him do what he's supposed to do. And Drake London's very good when teams let him do that. So that's why I'm going to go with Drake London there. And again, I feel like he's underpriced, Austin, 6,400 on DraftKings in a PPR format. I'm all over Drake London this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those 3 lineups that you're making that have Michael Penix in them, you got to have a Drake London stack in there. And I even think like if you wanted to get creative and you're in a large field contest, playing Michael Penix, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, bringing it back with Malik Neighbors, like that could get really interesting because Penix is decent. If he gets you 16 points and you're getting 20, 30 points from those other piece from those other 3 and able to still pay up for an expensive player elsewhere in your lineup, like that's a really interesting way to get different. And people are not going to want to play 4 players from this game in their lineup.
Yeah, I'm nervous that you and I agree on a game being a sneaky game, so I'm going to be interested to see how it plays out. Let's move on to the tight ends here, Austin. You and I each have one, obviously. We're not Kelly Singh. We don't build 2 tight end lineups.
Yeah, so this is me getting the bring back for the Detroit-Chicago game. We're going back to Sam Laporta. Chicago has allowed the 4th most points to the tight end position over the past 4 weeks. And Sam Laporta, he's been getting more involved in the offense down the stretch. I think also now that you're going to have less David Montgomery. So, I mean, well, I guess we haven't. Again, David Montgomery's like been going to the IR, not going to the IR, going back to the IR again, and so I actually don't know where we are on David Montgomery.
Not going to the IR. May play in the postseason. Will certainly not be around in the regular season. So.
Okay, so even fewer touches going to the running back position because I don't think that they're going to just say like, I mean, they'll add in some Craig Reynolds.
I think we don't disparage Craig Reynolds in my presence.
But I don't think that they're going to like. I think they will probably reduce their rushing game a little bit. They will give Jahmyr Gibbs the ball too, but they also got to think about the playoffs for him too. So they need to keep him healthy. All that to say, Sam Laporta has been getting more involved down the stretch. Now, it hasn't always been pretty. The last time that these 2 teams played, though, he did score 2 touchdowns. Now, it was on 3 catches, and that's not ideal and 6 yards. But
I was just going to say, wasn't it all like here's the thing. It screams, hey, David Montgomery's hurt. Who are we going to get into the end zone? Sam Laporta.
Exactly. But he is also coming off of a 10-target game. Now, that was a very high-volume, fast script game against the Bills where they were trying to come back a lot during it. But even the week before that against Green Bay, he had 7 targets. And frankly, like this defense is banged up. I think part of the reason we're starting to see Detroit get into these shootouts is not simply because they're playing good teams. I think it's because the defense is banged up, and so that could continue this week. If Chicago is able to push Detroit, maybe something weird happens. Like we've seen games where the underdog gets up by 2 touchdowns early, and then the other team, the favorite team, is having to make a comeback. Like that could very well happen here, and Sam Laporta will be a key aspect of them trying to stay in it if that does happen.
That's been Caleb this whole season. Like I said, the kid goes into halftime looking like garbage and then comes out looking like a Hall of Famer. So we'll see if that trend continues. Austin, my trend of loving cheap tight ends is going to continue because Brenton Strange fell into everybody's lap last week. And one of the things I noticed, and again, it's the fantasy playoffs, so not a lot of people are doing waiver wire ads, but his rostership percentage barely went up 10%, even though he was the number 2 tight end in fantasy last week. That tells me people might be ignoring him, and you have to scroll far to find Brenton Strange. You have to be going in with the intention of I'm building a lineup with Brenton Strange as a part of it, and you probably should be. Led tight ends in targets last week, led tight ends in receptions last week, and now gets the Raiders, who since week 8 give up the most fantasy points to tight ends. In that span, they've given up 3 20-plus games, and the average score against them is 9 points. That's called high reward, low risk. Like that's exactly what you're looking for. It seems Mac Jones is going to continue to take the easy dump off routes. He'll occasionally find Brian Thomas, but for the most part, he wants his tight end. He wants to throw to Travis Etienne, and I'm banking that on that again this week. You do have to monitor the injury report. Strange popped up with a questionable tag, but with Evan Ingram on IR, if Strange can play, they're going to play him. This kid has a lot to prove. He's a backup tight end in his third year in the NFL, maybe only second year in the NFL. He has a lot to prove. I think he's going to be out there on the field, Austin. It's just such a cake matchup for him against the Raiders.
Yeah, I definitely I like that pick, and I think if if you have an extra $100 to spare in your cash lineups, you should move up from Grant Calcaterra to Bretton Strange, because I do think he is even a little bit safer than Calcaterra this week. Or you could just also punt off the cliff at defense, and just get a little gross with defense and get Bretton Strange in your lineup.
Last week, Austin, in my semifinals of the team that's in the finals right now, I'm streaming tight end. I lost Dallas Goedert. I had Calcaterra, Stone Smart, and Bretton Strange all on my bench, just trying to decide which one to start. And I ended up going Stone Smart, who was below average, but thankfully did not cut Bretton Strange, and he'll be starting for me in the finals this week. So I'm pretty happy about that.
There you go.
All right. No lineup is complete without a defense, Austin, and go ahead and get us started, because the game you're going to pick on, I feel like you can choose either one of these defenses and it could work out really, really well for you. I made the joke on Tuesday. I think this game maybe leads the NFL in interceptions this week. So
yeah, it very well could. It's the Tennessee Titans versus the Indianapolis Colts, and I'm picking the Tennessee Titans side of it because they're cheaper.
Yeah.
And we've seen, first off, Anthony Richardson throw bad interceptions, but there was a weird play in this Indy's game last week where they tried to do a little trick play, and I forget who they were playing, but it got snuffed out hardcore and returned for a touchdown. They did one of those nice little throwback plays, and I've never seen a play a pick six so embarrassing as that one. I don't even think it was technically a pick six, because I think it had to be a backwards pass, but it looked like a pick six, but it was like a fumble recovery to return for a touchdown. It's kind of incredible. Yeah, I'm picking on this Indy team, and I need the salary savings, so I'll pay down for Tennessee.
I love that you don't remember who Indy was playing, because it's the Denver Broncos, which is the defense that I used to beat you in our contest, which I'll get to in a second, because that touchdown basically saved my life in a lot of DFS stuff. So that was hilarious. Austin, I've shared this with you before, certainly maybe on the show, but I just want to let folks know. When I rank defenses, I literally scroll to the bottom and I just look and say, will I play this team this week? I want cheap on defense. For the last couple of weeks, my favorite defense hasn't been the cheapest defense, and I'm going to stick with that. The Minnesota Vikings going to Seattle. Austin talked about this. While Jackson Smith-Njigba has been good, Geno Smith actually hasn't been good. And now he's dealing with an injury, and if Geno Smith can't play, it's Sam Howell, which is great for a defense. And Minnesota, as Austin pointed out, they get torched by wide receivers. I'm not telling you Minnesota is not going to give up points here, but they throw enough at defenses for sacks and turnovers, and that's what you're hoping for. And you're hoping one of those sacks and turnovers leads to the ugliest pick six you've ever seen. And so that's why I'm going to pick on Minnesota here. It is tough that they're traveling to Seattle, but it's not like Minnesota, while they are a dome team, they understand the cold weather. I'm not too worried about Minnesota going to Seattle. They're not unused to loud environments. I think everything's going to be fine there. But when I looked at defenses this week, not a lot of matchups stood out to me, but I think Minnesota against Seattle, with the issues at quarterback, the injuries at running back, Kenneth Walker's questionable, Zach Charbonnet is questionable. There's just so much going on here where I think this plays out well for Minnesota. I feel like they kind of give me that same thing, Austin, where they're safe, but they do have a high ceiling as well.
Yeah, and I will just throw out there, since you brought it up, if Sam Howell is playing quarterback, do not play Jackson Smith.
There you go. I'm glad I was able to segue that for you, because, yeah, that's dangerous if I've ever heard of it right there. So, as alluded to, every week Austin and I do a head-to-head. We call it the Valedictorian Shootout to stay on the theme of the show. And last week, Austin, I won 106-88. And before you say, God, these guys suck, we build these lineups on Thursday, people. So we had some duds in our lineup, Austin. You started a guy who didn't even end up playing Braylon Allen because you thought Breece Hall was still going to be out. I was all in on Michael Wilson. He did absolutely nothing. But Austin, I beat you by 18, and our two defenses, your defense got a 1, my defense got a 20, my defense outscored you by 19. So literally we had terrible lineups. I just got the right defense and you didn't get the right defense. So it just goes down that way sometimes. So for this, Austin and I break down just a DraftKings lineup that we're going to play against each other for the fun of it. Just so I get some win this season. I'm 9-6 now. Austin has 6 over me. I have 9 over him. We run this show through the final week. So Austin, you have to win these next 3 to even this thing up. Let's go ahead and announce our lineups. Almost all of my players you guys have heard me talk about. Matthew Stafford, James Conner. I'm going with Jerome Ford. He's a cheap starter. Cincinnati gives up a ton of points to running backs. I don't love starting any player for Cleveland this week, but as Austin mentioned, if you want a lot of studs, you got to take some scrubs as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Jerome Ford, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Drake London. And then I was happy, Austin, Demario Douglas in my 4 wide receiver lineup fell into my lap here in a PPR format. New England should be throwing a ton against Buffalo. So I was happy that I was able to get him in with Brenton Strange in the Minnesota defense.
Okay, well, I think it's over for me. So I'm kind of just like going for it on this one. We're going to
love
go
it.
big or go home. So Michael Penix as my quarterback at $4,500 on DraftKings. I have 2 running backs, Patrick Taylor at $5,200, Bijan Robinson at $8,100. Leaves me with 4 receivers, 3 of which we talked about on the show. Jamar Chase at $8,500, Justin Jefferson at $8,200, Wan'Dale Robinson at $4,100. And then I managed to get Michael Pittman in there at $5K. I don't know how I feel about that. But I thought, I need something a little bit high upside to try and make this happen. So we're going with Michael Pittman.
I haven't heard him in a lineup a lot this season. So
yeah, I don't know if I would actually recommend him in cash, but for this contest,
for the Ryan versus Austin, anything goes. So
yeah, I'm contemplating what I'm going to do with that 4th receiver in cash. But Pittman is an initial option, but we'll see where we go. My tight end, Grant Calcaterra at $3,400, and then my defense. Here's a wild ride for you. Las Vegas Raiders, $2,700.
Austin, I think I'm the only person on Football Guys who has them ranked, and they are like my number 2 on both because I couldn't put them ahead against Minnesota. I'm starting them in a championship this week. I love the Raiders defense this week, and I don't feel like you're insane, but I do feel like I'm insane.
Yeah, I mean, the matchup against the Jaguars, I mean, it's pretty good. And they've actually, I was looking back.
They've been getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, they've been a solid fantasy defense. And I'm like, okay, we're $2,700. That's cheap. Cool.
Exactly. Everything you said is what I've been spending a lot of time on earlier this morning. And what's funny is I was like, I need to bring this up in the show and completely forgot until you said it. So I'm so glad that went down. As I mentioned, you guys can play DFS with us. We are not going to run these lineups against you. Even I have been changing my lineup as of late, so I can't make that joke. But Austin certainly runs a better lineup. Though, Austin, if I had stuck with my Thursday lineup, I actually would have had 20 more points. I did terrible in our contest this week. I finished last in both contests. But who didn't finish last, Guju Man over on DraftKings wins back-to-back. He takes down the Week 15 after taking down the Week 14, scores 176 points. That is his 5th win all-time. And over on FanDuel, it is ERTLT. Don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce that. They won Week 15 with one of the lowest scores I think we've ever seen take down our FanDuel lineup. But hey, a win's a win. 118.68, getting them their 3rd win of the season. Folks, that is the Week 16 edition of the DFS Academy. Austin, please let everybody know what DFS products you put out there for Club Fantasy.
Yeah, we have 3 DFS products that come out every week on Thursday nights. Josh Hudson and I do a week releases Thursday morning, a showdown slate, a episode on the showdown slate for Thursday night. It releases on Thursday morning. That was really hard to say, apparently. That happens every Thursday. On Fridays, this show releases the DFS Academy. You get our cash and tournament picks. And then every Saturday, you get my DFS Cash article, which is the most up-to-date source of information I put out there on cash picks. That is the A-list. It releases Saturday mornings or middays.
Yeah. Nah, you're usually pretty good. I usually still get it out in the morning, even when you get it to me a little later. I sometimes just don't put the tweet out till midday, so we're not stacking tweets on top of each other. But you've been you've been really good about it. So don't give yourself a hard time there. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of this show. That is our DFS coverage for the week. As Austin pointed out to you, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. However, we still have you covered for redraft. There's still a couple of weeks there. Every Saturday, we go live from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Start, sit, different day. All we do is answer your start, sit questions for an entire hour. We have great guests. There's no agenda on the show. It's literally just helping you guys win fantasy matchups. And if you'd rather not have your question answered live on YouTube, but you're still over on Twitter, you can pay attention to it's at Club Fantasy FFL. We do a thread every Sunday morning where we tag all of our writers. You guys answer your questions and all of us chime in and give you our opinions. Hopefully they're great opinions. Hopefully we help get you to a championship. Just a couple more weeks of fantasy football left, folks. Club Fantasy is here to help you win. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Great slates. If you're not back before the holiday, happy holidays. For Austin, I'm Ryan. We'll see you guys next week.